Ready to. Hi, welcome. Welcome.
Shelley, be quiet.
Yeah, right. We've substituted in our speaker again, and we have Phil Washington substituting in for Phil Washington.
Oh,
So,
okay.
welcome, Phil. This is the Transit Coalition dinner meeting. We have these meetings about every month or so. We have a lot of Metro people to educate you about transit, and we have other entities such as High Speed Rail and Metrolink and others. So we'll be having the CEO of Metrolink coming soon, and we have the Richard from Construction Management. So we have a bunch of meetings coming up, and you're on the email. You're all on the email list, so I'll be sending you things. Transit Coalition is a nonprofit that deals with transportation advocacy, land use planning, goods movement, and educational programs. So we've been doing this for about close to 18 years now. And so the first thing we do, besides our upcoming meetings, is we introduce everybody so Mr. Washington knows who's here. So why don't we start with, welcome everybody to our meeting. And so tonight our speaker is Phil Washington. For those that don't know, he's the Chief Executive Officer of the Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority, short-term known as Metro. Phil, as the CEO of Metro, has been here for what, 4, 5, 6 years now?
A little over 4.
So he's been running this agency, I hope having a lot of fun. So Phil's going to engage tonight. He'll be telling some of the initiatives of Metro, maybe tip off some interesting things that you guys don't know about. And then we're going to open up to questions, and then when everybody's satisfied, or Phil wants to leave, then
Everybody's satisfied.
just depends on that. But I'm sure there's lots of questions, more questions than there's room to answer. But anyways, Phil Washington, welcome to Transit Coalition.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Bart. Bart has been a tremendous partner and an advocate for transportation initiatives here in LA County. So happy to be here, Bart, and thank you for doing what you do. So got a lot of information that I'm going to convey, but I want this to just to be a sort of a comfortable conversation, if you will, because I don't necessarily like giving a whole bunch of speeches and stuff, even though I've done that. But you know, I like for it to be sort of informal. Let me start off with kind of what projects are in the pipeline, because I think that people don't realize that over the next 12 to 24 months, we are going to have more than 70 projects and procurements that are going to go out for bid. 73 of them to be exact. And they range in size from $100,000 to up to $700 million, with many of these projects in the billions as well. And so what we're talking about is a lot of activity. We're talking about a lot of opportunities, and specifically about 32 contracts for professional services and architectural and engineering and construction support services, and various environmental services, about 28 for construction of various facilities, upgrades, highway improvements, etc. We have currently, we're managing currently between 18 and $20 billion of projects right now. And those are in construction, with another maybe 8 or 10 projects that are in the planning stages and about to move to design and construction. And as I see it, the most important thing on the project management side or project delivery side that I see is getting projects out of the planning process Now, you know, there's a lot of discussion about all kinds of things, 28 by 2028 and all of these kinds of things, but my focus is on getting projects out of the planning process and into design and construction. That is my focus. And when I was in the military, we used to call it getting in the door. So in this case, it's getting in the door in the military context was getting ready to jump out of a plane. You get in the door, that's what we used to say. But in this case, getting out the door, into the door, in my mind, is getting from planning to construction. That is what's important if we're going to accelerate projects and all that. So what does that mean? That means making timely decisions to get projects through the planning process, right? Getting to a project definition, you know, getting our board to select alignments, getting our board to get to locally preferred alignments and that kind of thing, making those decisions in the planning process to get us to design and construction. I see that as one of our biggest challenges. Now, that's not to say that managing these huge projects with the contractors and the stakeholders and all that is not a challenge, because that's a challenge too. You know, we are, as I said, we're managing between 18 and $20 billion in projects and dealing with the various stakeholders with regard to these projects is incredible as well. And that includes, again, the communities, the contractors, the cities where we have to get permitting from, foreclosures and all of those things. Now, those projects that I mentioned, the 73 projects that's going to be coming out in the next 12 to 24 months, they include the Airport Metro Connector, they include the West Santa Ana branch, at least the RFQ, they include the Sepulveda Transit Corridor. We're going to put out a project development agreement or PDA on that. Our rail-to-rail transportation path, sound wall packages, highway projects, the I-5 North, specifically on HOV, Orange Line upgrades. You know we're doing the upgrades to the Orange Line that will include gates like railway gates. We're going to put those on the Orange Line for our bus rapid transit. That's going to increase the speed of that line by some 20%. And Link US right here, some of the advanced utility relocations, the East San Fernando Valley advanced utility relocations. So all of this work is going to be coming out very quickly. I was up in San Fernando Valley, up in the valley today, and I was talking to faith leaders up there. Because we've got this, we're touching and meeting with faith leaders from all over the county. We started this about 3 years ago, where we're meeting with faith leaders and telling them and sharing with them what we're doing here in LA County with the hopes of them partnering with us and them telling their parishioners kind of what we're doing and getting input from them as well. And I was telling them about some of the projects up in the valley, and it was amazing that, first of all, they were very well informed about some of the things that were going on, but then again, some things they were not aware of. It was just good getting their input. But we were talking about the Orange Line. I mean, the Orange Line is, as you know, bus rapid transit. It's our most heavily used BRT. And in the old days of transportation, some of you old cats will remember this, you started with the bus rapid transit. You know, it was a rail line on wheels, and then you progressed to a rail line, you know, and that is what we're doing on the Orange Line. The Orange Line is right now, again, our most successful line. It's a BRT, and it's about a 52-minute runtime from end to end, with the gates, which will be the first BRT in the world with railroad type gates that come down just like a train is coming. It's gonna reduce that running time by 20%, from like 52 minutes end to end to something like 40 or 35 or something like that. Do the math. That's incredible. And then later on in the Measure M plan, we have a rail line that will replace that BRT and go all the way to Pasadena. So we're doing the Orange Line actually the right way with the BRT to test the ridership and all that, and then go on the rail. Well, guess what? That's hard to do in some places because everybody wants the sexy rail line. Give me that sexy rail line, you know what I mean? The hell with the BRT. We just found this out with the Vermont corridor, where we were supposed to start with the BRT. That is what is in the early years of Measure M, and then go to rail. And so right now, because of some things that occurred a month or two ago, to include rail in the Vermont corridor discussion, the BRT that was going to come early is now delayed. Why is that delayed? Because including rail adds to the study period and also adds cost to the study. And so the BRT then, the basic workhorse, right, is going to be delayed that much time because we added rail this soon. Does everybody follow me? So what we are trying to do is to make sure that everyone understands, in order to accelerate these projects, we have to be disciplined in the planning process. And so as a result of that, I asked our planning folks just last month, I think they did this, was to educate our board and our board staff on the planning process itself. You know what I'm saying? Because we say we're in the planning process, nobody knows what the hell the planning process is. And nobody knows the stages or the phases of the planning process. They just say we're in the planning process. And then what happens is, when you no one knows the impact or the consequences of not making timely decisions in the planning process, and don't realize that it slows the whole project down if those decisions are not made. So I want you to hear from me. I'm trying to get things in the door, right? In the door, out of planning into design and construction. And then once you do that, wow, so many things open up in terms of advocating for funding, right? Because we got people wanting to go, we got folks want to go to Washington, D.C. and advocate for funding to build something, and we're not even out of the planning stage. Well, guess what USDOT is going to tell you? We don't know about that project. Is it in the pipeline yet? No. It's still in the feasibility? Yeah. We have no idea. Come back to us when it's out the door in the design and construction period. So we've got a lot of projects that we're trying to get out the door. The next thing I wanted to touch on is rolling stock. Because in addition to all of these projects we're trying to get ready, there's a big need for vehicles, right? For all the light rail vehicles, heavy rail vehicles, big need. We have a requirement, or we have a need for 315 new light rail vehicles between now and fiscal year 35. We have a requirement for heavy rail vehicles. We have an order with CRRC. You all know what CRRC is? And I'm going to tell you a quick story of my adventures in Washington 2 weeks ago. CRRC is the largest passenger rail car maker in the world.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, here we go.
Yes, sir. The largest rail car maker in the world in China. We have an order for 282 of those vehicles. Chicago, my buddy Dorval Carter, who's the CEO in Chicago, has the biggest order in this country. I think he's got about 600 vehicles. MBTA in Boston has an order for like, I think 300 or so. And then here we are with 282. So we did the contract about a year and a half ago. We signed the deal with CRRC. And then up pops this legislation from Senator Cornyn from Texas, who said that if you're using federal dollars to buy rail cars, you can't do it if they're coming from CRRC.
Just did it.
Yeah. And so I was, you know, we were sort of on pins and needles. I never get really nervous or anything. That's just my nature. I ain't freaking out about nothing. But we were concerned about whether our contract would be honored since we had already finalized the contract prior to him coming out with this legislation. And so there was a little question mark there of whether our contract would be grandfathered in. Long story short, it was, along with the options, because we have various options on that contract. The base order is 64 vehicles, and then we got options for the remainder, getting us to 282. But in the meantime, there's this move afoot to ban vehicles from China. And so 2 weeks ago, I was summoned to testify in front of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee about rail vehicles. And I went there, and some of you may have seen that. I felt like Bill Barr or something, you know, and the upshot of this was I said, and I do, stand by our procurement, where we selected what's now being called a state-owned enterprise. And a state-owned enterprise is what they're accusing CRRC of, being a state-owned enterprise, because they are owned, I believe, by the Chinese government. But the reason I mention all this, and the reason that there's this big hullabaloo about these rail vehicles is cybersecurity folks are saying that they may be sort of like rolling espionage vehicles and being able to track people and, you know, in the vehicle. I don't know. You know, if you ask me, I think it's you know, a little bit over the top. But my response to all of that is we'll do what we have to do when we get those vehicles. We're going to sweep them. We're going to do whatever we got to do. There ain't going to be no bugs on those vehicles. And I said that at the testimony. But at the same time, I use that venue to talk about what we have introduced to our board here, and that is to stand up a passenger rail car manufacturing facility in this country and in LA County.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. There are no passenger rail car manufacturing facilities in this country at all. Now, there's assembly plants, you know, and all of that, but I'm talking about from soup to nuts, forging of steel, manufacturing facility for passenger rail cars. So if you are going to beat me up, Congress, are you filming all this? No, I don't care. I said that there too. If you're going to beat us up, not just LA Metro, but Chicago has a big order. Boston has a big order. I mean, there are no manufacturing facilities here. What do you want us to do? And there was a well-placed question in the audience that said, Phil, what can Congress do to help those regions that are trying to stand up a rail car manufacturing facility? I did the dramatic pause. You look at the camera. I said you can give preferential treatment to those regions and funding to those regions that are trying to set up a rail car manufacturing facility, which is what we are trying and looking to do. That action right now is with the Board of Supervisors to determine a location for a site, because I didn't want to pick the site. And let me just say, last August, I convened here in this building a meeting of all the CEOs in the world that manufacture passenger rail car vehicles. We had them right here in this building. All the CEOs, China, Russia, Japan, Canada, South Korea. There was about 20 of them here, Bombardier. All these guys were here, and ladies. And we talked about this idea of setting up. They want to do it, and so right now we are working with the county to figure out what kind of package we can put together of incentives to bring a rail car manufacturing facility here. Now I mention all that because the idea of doing that brings more opportunities for our, you and the private sector or contractors and consultants here in this area. So I mentioned it was a 3.5-hour hearing, and when I left out of there, I needed maybe 3 fingers of scotch or whatever as I left the Capitol. I wanted to touch on this, one of the biggest challenges that I think we have out here with all these projects. And by the way, that testimony that I just mentioned, I was one of 5, and I think BYD was there. Yeah, and I see Hal Dash, who was trying to get a bootleg copy of my testimony. It was a couple of cybersecurity guys, one retired 1-star general that I believe I knew 25 years ago when he was a captain or something. I used to push him around or whatever. And he was a retired 1-star general. He was on there, and he was a cybersecurity guy that was really the boogeyman on the whole thing, saying these cars are going to be, I don't know. I wanted to just touch on, I think that's a false alarm.
Attention in the building. We are conducting a fire alarm test. Please disregard all fire alarm until further notice.
Okay.
Attention in the building. We are conducting a fire alarm test. Please disregard all fire alarm until further notice. Thank you.
All right. The third thing I wanted to touch on was a big challenge that's out there, and that's the lack of a qualified workforce. To do all of the work that needs to be done, as we, 1, go with the Measure M schedule, but 2, the idea of acceleration. Because all of this is connected now. The lack of a qualified workforce to try to accelerate projects and contractor capacity. Now you say, there ain't no contractor capacity issue because give me all the work, I can do all the work. What we're talking about is massive, massive projects. The West Santa Ana branch, $6.97 billion. The possibility of a P3 arrangement on something like that, we need to have a concern about contractor capacity, and we need to have a concern about the lack of a skilled workforce. I'm just telling you. Because if we are not concerned about it, the prices are going to go through the roof. Because now you're talking about people having to bring folks in from out of town and, all kinds of stuff. So we're really concentrating on this challenge of both those things, the lack of a qualified workforce and contractor capacity. We really are. We are doing everything we can to address the lack of a qualified workforce. Right now, here at Metro, 40% of our employees here, 40% of the 11,000 employees here are at retirement age right now. That's 40%. 70% are over the age of 40. And so when we look down the road, the next 10, 15, 20 years, this issue of the lack of a qualified workforce for those very specific disciplines, track maintainer, electromechanic, I mean, all of these disciplines that we need on these projects, electricians, I mean, all these things is a big concern to us. And so we've put together a career pathway. And I think I showed that to some of you, but this career pathway is really designed to provide training opportunities from, I call cradle to grave. Cradle to grave in the transportation infrastructure space, right? What people need to do to get qualified in all of these areas. And the one thing we were missing as we put together that career pathway, the one thing that we were missing as I kept looking at this thing was kids. And that is why we started the transportation school. We're going to break ground on the transportation school next spring, grades 9 to 12, a boarding school concept where kids will stay there 5 days a week. We are focusing on foster care kids. We're focusing on at-risk kids. And we'll start with one grade at a time, 9th grade first. And at the end of the day, when all four-year kids are in there, it'll be about 450 kids. And we are going to create our own pipeline of qualified workforce. And we'll let industry know how you can play a role in that, even if it's assemblies or teaching a class or something like that. The site is on Vermont and Manchester. And we took to our board an action for $75 million for the first 15 years for the operating costs. And the Board of Supervisors took the same action, $75 million for the first 15 years. So we got $150 million. And that's been approved by both boards, the Metro Board and the County Board already. And we're going to break ground. So when we start talking about all these projects, we're trying to hit everything and dot every I, not just for the projects, but who will work on the projects in years and years to come. So this idea of a career pathway, this idea of a career pathway, cradle to grave, with the school as the cradle, and the grave being the CEO position. That's what we're talking about. Did you have a question?
A statement more than a question.
Yes, sir.
You know, you're leading a path to a lifetime achievement, not just here.
Yeah.
Because you can carry that apprenticeship, that ability to do a skill, okay? And I think that's what's missing now, more than anything else, is the fact of a skill of being a master of a craft.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
you can take that worldwide.
Yeah. That is what our thought is. Our thought is that the vision is that LA County is the center of transportation infrastructure excellence. That's the vision, where just like a farm team, because you know the baseball farm team, you all know how that came about first? Like in the 1940s, a a guy named Branch Rickey. Y'all heard of Branch Rickey? Now, Branch Rickey was the one that brought in Jackie Robinson as the first African-American player in baseball. Well, prior to that, he was looking at all these other teams, and he was having a hard time trying to figure out how he would develop players in baseball. And so he started the farm teams. Well, he said, we're going to have these minor league teams down here, and then they'll develop, and then they will come to the major leagues. And he did that first with the Brooklyn Dodgers, and then before you knew it, every team had a farm team, minor leagues. That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about creating our own transportation infrastructure farm team here in LA County who can be called upon anywhere in the world. Anywhere in the world. Just like Tiger teams, you know, you hear about the firefighters, and the firefighters, you know, they get called to go to another state to help put out the, that's what we want. We want our young people here to be able to be called upon anywhere in the world, because I insisted on a curriculum and classes in different languages at this transportation school too. And so our young people will be called on in the infrastructure space anywhere, definitely in this country, because there's going to be, the need is so great, not just for building projects, but rebuilding projects as a result of natural disasters, climate change. We're going to have more infrastructure devastation around the world because of climate change. And so that is the idea that when people think about infrastructure development and building and rebuilding of infrastructure, LA County is synonymous with that. That is the vision that we're thinking about. A couple other things, and then we will get to questions. Our next gen bus study. We are doing a bus study. The first time it's been done at LA Metro in 25, 30 years. What we're saying to this is that we are going to wipe the slate clean of the routes, everything that we thought we knew with our bus system that's on the street right now, and we're going to redo the whole thing. Now, this is an 18-month project, and we're getting toward the end of it. That effort to redesign and reimagine our whole bus system is a huge effort. We have a consultant helping us with this. 70% of our riders are on the bus. They're not on rail. And so people, you know, the whole rail thing, 70 to 75% are actually on the bus. And so we know that residential areas and employment centers have changed over the last 25 years. Even though most transit agencies do a shake-up, you know, like 3 times a year, but those are just small little surgical kinds of adjustments. We're talking about doing the whole thing. And so I want you all to know about that. We're going to brief our board probably at the end of this year on the results of that next gen study. I talked a lot about projects, and you know, with your questions we can get into detail on some of them, but I do want to mention a couple of them that are very, very key. One is, of course, the airport station. You know, the idea of rail, connecting rail to the airport, big. You know, the airport is doing the people mover thing out to our station, so 2 miles from the terminals out to our airport station. Our airport station, we're in the throes of finishing up design. Some of you may be working on that. Who's working on the airport station? Yeah. So you all know, Kleinfelder, you guys are on that, right? And so that is a huge project for us, connected to the Crenshaw line. And the Crenshaw line is about 91% complete. So we are, and the last 10% in terms of these projects are, you know, very intricate, and in this case on the Crenshaw line, electrical stuff and all of that. And so we're looking to open that in spring, summer of next year. The Sepulveda Transit Corridor, though, I just wanted to make a couple of points on that. because we're gonna put out a project development agreement, and what we're talking about is bringing on a developer early on in the process, much earlier than what we would normally do. And we're gonna put that solicitation on the street this summer, probably, well, maybe this fall. We're gonna put that out there to bring on a contractor slash consultant slash developer to help us with that project. Now, there's a lot of discussion about mode, heavy rail, monorail. There's a lot of discussion about that. We have not made a decision on that yet, but just make sure that you keep your eyes open on that. But we're looking at ridership of about 130,000 a day. That's incredible. When you talk about a line, it depends on the mode, it depends on the capacity, but we are actually looking to plan for something that goes through the Sepulveda Pass and then all the way down to LAX. So this is a big, big deal where it takes, I don't know, how long does it take folks to get through the Sepulveda? An hour and a half?
6 hours.
2 hours, yeah. I mean, can you imagine what a difference this thing is gonna make when you're talking about being on the train 18, 20 minutes through the Sepulveda? I mean, it's incredible. It changes how everybody thinks and how everybody moves around. The last thing I want to talk about is, well, the last two things I want to talk about is, one, congestion pricing. And if I can survive this, man, I might be okay. If I can survive this congestion pricing thing, first of all, I think it's the absolute right thing to do. Because the alternative is gridlock. I mean, LA County, City of Los Angeles, was #1 in congestion for the 6th year in a row as the most congested region in the world. That's incredible. And so part of our charter and part of our mission at LA Metro, now yes, moving people and all that, but if you read that mission statement from way back when LA Metro was created, it talked about relieving congestion. So this is actually, and I had to remind people of that, this is actually part of our mission. And so what we have presented is the 3 congestion pricing models, and you know what those 3 are. The quadrant model, like the London model, so you drive into the city center, you drive into that quadrant, boom, you get a fee. You get hit with a fee. That's one model, the quadrant model. The next model is the corridor model that says you got a whole quarter, at certain times of the day or whatever, you pay if you're in that quarter. And then the third congestion pricing model is the vehicle miles traveled. You reach a threshold or whatever for that month, boom, you get hit with a fee. We've also said that if we do this right, #1, you will relieve congestion and change behaviors. You'll change behaviors, right? And 2, the revenue that is generated from congestion pricing could be used to make transit free for everybody. And that is what we have presented, that is what I have presented. And as I presented that, I backed out of the room. You know what I'm saying? So where we are now is we are doing a feasibility study, or we have a feasibility study on the street right now. Some of you already know this, you're probably tracking it now. Anybody interested in that feasibility study? Yeah. So that feasibility study, we are going to bring on a consultant to help us determine a couple of things. One is what model works best, those 3 models that I just mentioned. What congestion pricing model works best, and where is the best place to pilot that congestion pricing model? Because think about this, if we say that we want to charge people for driving in a certain area, then we have to have transit alternatives. You know what I'm saying? you can't say you're gonna make folks do something and you don't have an alternative. So in my mind, we have to already have transit in that pilot area and the ability to expand transit even in that pilot area. And then you can start to say that the revenue generated in that pilot area can be used to make transit free in that pilot area to start with. And if you say transit will be free, then you can incrementally, you can start by saying seniors are free first, and then students, and then, you know what I mean? So there's all kinds of things that we can do with that. So we're out with the feasibility study, and we think we will be able to get to identify a pilot area to pilot congestion pricing within 18 months to 2 years. That's congestion pricing. The last thing I wanted to mention was equity. So we brought to our board probably about a year and a half ago, yeah, a little over a year ago, an equity platform, an equity framework. What we're saying here is that everything that we do, we want to look through the lens of equity when we do it. Any project, any initiative, congestion pricing is a good example. How do we make what we do equitable for people in different communities? And this is not an easy thing, right? Because first we've said we have to define and measure equity. So when you talk about defining equity, now equity means something different for a lot of people. So just defining it is going to be a challenge. But we are in the throes of that. We're going to bring on an equity officer. And we have the solicitation out on that. And so people will say, well, why is that important? Equity in infrastructure is very, very important. I see this young lady, I mentioned she's reading The Power Broker, the story of Robert Moses in New York, the building of New York. And when you talk about how infrastructure, the highways, transit, all of that was built in New York, and the discriminatory practices that were employed in New York, you can see how equity becomes very, very important. And the stories in the book, and I see you're not even on that page yet, so I'll just tell you, because that's one of the greatest books ever written by Robert Caro, where he went into a community and he was known for giving people 90 days, 30 days to get out. Now this was before environmental laws and all of that, and how he identified an alignment for one of the highways that displaced 250,000 people, when he could have moved that alignment a quarter of a mile different, and it would have impacted about 20,000 people. But he stayed with that alignment that impacted 250,000 because of a favor by one of the robber barons who was rich and didn't want his golf course impacted. Equity in infrastructure is a very, very important thing. So when you get to that chapter in the book, call me up and we'll talk about it. It's still about 200 pages away. Just looking at that. So I will stop there and maybe open it up to any questions, if that's okay, Bart?
Oh, as many as we can fit in.
Okay, the NBA game's on. No, go ahead. You want to know the score? Well, no, don't tell me. Yes, sir.
Your team is winning.
Okay, good. Chicago Bulls. All right, go ahead.
Mr. Washington, you discussed a supposed past.
Yeah.
Now, you created your Office of Extraordinary Innovation.
That's right.
Are the contractors or have the option to come present you, either 3 or different approaches that they can come up with a new concept that you may not be, I know you said you're bringing somebody on, but,
Yeah.
but you're open to contractors bringing you new and innovative,
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we have been open to that from the very beginning. I mean, we have, we got, at least 2 unsolicited proposals, I know on West Santa Ana branch. We're open to unsolicited proposals on Sepulveda, you know, until we put out, you know, of course you got the blackout period once we put that solicitation out. But we're open to that. We want to hear those ideas. That's why we set up that office. I mean, we set up that Office of Extraordinary Innovation. I got to tell you, you know, I was dreaming about this, right? What was I going to call this? So I was literally dreaming about this. I was like, and so I wrote some stuff down, like in the middle of the night. I woke up and I had these ideas, and I came up with that name. And then I came in and I mentioned it to somebody on my staff, and they said, Phil, why don't you just call it the Office of Innovation? Why you got that extraordinary thing in there? I said, you know what, you missed the whole point, man. You will not be on that team. The whole idea is extraordinary. I mean, we expectation, you know. But yeah, we welcome that. Yeah.
In regards to the transportation school, you talked about Cradle to Grave, which, in other words, the term used to use at the fire department was recruitment, retention, and retirement. The recruitment, you talked about it, you know, obviously to give an opportunity to foster children, maybe underprivileged children first, and then maybe open it up afterward. One thing that I experienced when I was with the fire department was retaining the interest of young boys and girls from the time that they're 13 all the way to the time that they're 21, because they just simply, there's so many distractions. Everybody wants to be a rap or a ball player, wants to be an artist. Not anything wrong with those, but when you think fire department being something that's admirable at times, and then now you translate that into transportation, how do you foresee keeping that interest or retaining those young minds?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, you know, this is going to be, first of all, I think the school is going to be oversubscribed. All right, so I think that parents will want to get their kids in, and we got to depend on that initially, because as much as I would love to see a 15-year-old walking around talking about design bill, you know what I mean? You see a 13 design bill. I don't know if it's going to happen. So we are going to, and there's going to be smarter people than me that's working on the marketing for this and all of that. And by the way, we're going to have a contractor running the school for operating the school. And we've already selected that contractor. And she has, her firm, she's a CEO, she has these boarding school concepts. She has 3 of them. Now, none of them have to do with, this will be the first transportation specific in the country. But she's going to help us market that. She's got a school in Washington, D.C., in the Anacostia area, one in Baltimore, and one in Miami. And we went and visited those schools, and they're incredible. But again, this is the first one with an industry bent. And so we have to work on that to figure out how we make this you know, sexy or interesting for a 14-year-old, you know, 13, 14-year-old. Because it's really all about changing lives in terms of a skill and salary and all of that. So we got to figure out a way to do that. But we got professionals that's going to be working on that in a big way. Yes, sir.
You spoke about equity.
Yes.
Matter of fact, you mentioned that book the young lady was reading concerning New York. You know, the exact same thing happened here. Yeah. And what it was the Santa Monica Freeway, the 10 freeway. It was originally, I believe, supposed to go down Venice Boulevard,
Okay.
but it was moved south of that. And the reason why, instead of a golf course, it was because of a racial divide. If you look where the 10 freeway is, it goes through a portion of town called Sugar Hill. And it was upper middle class to very well off blacks that lived there, professional individuals. The decision was made to go through that area in order to keep the population of blacks further south and north.
Right.
And eventually, I believe it was taken to court, and it was proven the fact that it was. The state of California was involved with that also.
Well, you know, this has happened in all parts of the country. Now, I mentioned New York, but I'm originally from Chicago, and if anybody knows the Dan Ryan Expressway, you know, the Dan Ryan, that was, when I was coming up, that was called the Black Belt. It was actually a dividing line between blacks on the east side of that expressway and the west side. So this happens all over the country. I mean, there was a big discussion when we presented the idea of congestion pricing. There was this big discussion at our board. It was a great discussion about equity. And one of the things that I said was, listen, let's get something straight. Now, we have to look at equity in terms of the congestion pricing initiative, but let's not fool ourselves into thinking that we're starting from an equitable point to begin with, right? Because infrastructure right now is inequitable to begin with when you start looking at the highways. So let's don't think we're starting from an equitable standpoint right now, when most of the highways in this country were built next to communities of color and they're breathing in the emissions, right? Now that's inequitable to begin with. We can talk about equity, but let's not think we're starting from this great equity position right now. And so when we talk about congestion pricing and cutting emissions down or decreasing emissions near those highways where communities of color now live, that is when we're starting to really get to equity. Because we can't tear down the highway, right? But if we talk about reducing emissions on the highways that are next to communities of color, then we're getting serious. Sir?
You may have considered this, and you may have actually, when you were in Washington, presented your transportation school.
Yes.
But as part of the transportation hub, as the rail transportation manufacturing hub of the United States, U.S. military puts very high priority on the ability to rebuild and replace their ships. Well, aircraft is covered here in Southern California, but the steel industry has been decimated in the United States. Right. And many, literally the military readiness is threatened by these key industries. If you could present this as a vital infrastructure, really a national security level, vital infrastructure requirement, you could probably multiply that $150 million quite well with federal support from this strategic perspective.
No, I appreciate that. Now there's two things now. When I testified, I was talking about a rail car manufacturing facility, not so much the school. Okay, so that's the first thing. But I do think that both could be categorized as national emergencies. I think it is a real national emergency that we do not have enough of a skilled workforce. I think that is a matter of national urgency. And I have said that everywhere I go, because I think it is. Not only do we have infrastructure that needs to be built, new infrastructure, but we also have infrastructure that needs to be rebuilt, when you talk about bridges and all that. And then you layer this other thing on here with natural disasters. Because we're gonna have more of those. And what is natural disasters destroying? They're destroying infrastructure. And so I think that triad of things really gets to this national emergency of us not having a qualified workforce. And I give you a perfect example. I was looking, Notre Dame went up in flames in Paris. And the Prime Minister, Macron, is he a Prime Minister? Is that his title? And he said, we're gonna rebuild this thing in 5 years. That's what he said. And I thought, and he said, we've got all the skill to do it. We've got the craftsmen. And I'm watching this, and I was like, wow, you know what? They probably do. And, you could argue that the bridge that went down in Minnesota, well, we rebuilt that in Atlanta. We did that. But can you imagine if the infrastructure fails more than one bridge at a time? You know what I mean? I don't know if we would have the qualified workforce to get at that. In fact, I don't think we would. Italy, when he made that statement that we're going to build this thing up in 5 more years, I believe he has the qualified workforce to do it in Europe. I really do, but I doubt we do. On a mass scale, if infrastructure deteriorates and collapses on a mass scale, I just don't know. I just don't know if we could have a critical mass of qualified workforce to do it. But we have to build on, we got to grow them now, I think. Yes, sir. Did you have your hand up?
Yeah, sorry. Just like one other component of infrastructure that's a huge crisis in this country right now, not so much transit, but that's part of it, is water.
Yeah.
All over the country, our water systems are failing, and while we're digging these transit tunnels, we've got to figure out how to redirect the water mains and upgrade them. And that's a huge, time bomb that this city is sitting on, trillions of dollars. So, but another thing on a completely different note, besides Sepulveda Pass, I am very concerned about Sepulveda Pass being heavy rail and the East Valley Transit Corridor being light rail. And we saw from the studies of the Sepulveda Pass that if they're both the same mode, the demand on East, it's so high on East San Fernando that you can't build at grade. But we were saying in the valley, build it grade separated. And I feel like that there's a $1.7 billion hole in this Sepulveda Pass plan. There happens to be $1.3 billion in the East Valley Rapid Transit Corridor plan. Mm-hmm. Maybe we can.
Well,
project.
Well, I'll say this. There's some holes in terms of funding, but I don't think it's anything we can't figure out. You know what I mean? We're going to figure. I believe we can structure an arrangement on both Sepulveda and East San Fernando Valley, because I actually think the East San Fernando Valley project is a perfect P3. I really do. And I think West Santa Ana Branch is a perfect P3. Those two are perfect P3s because they're standalone. It's just like the Eagle project that I worked on in Denver. It's a standalone facility. If you go to Denver, you go to the airport, the rail line that goes downtown, straight downtown, we built that. That's the first transit P3 in this country. And it's a standalone, it's not an extension, right? Because a lot of these jobs that we're doing out here are extensions. You can't really do an O&M deal on an extension. You know what I mean? Because we're already operating part of the extension and you try to bring the private sector, that's not gonna work. But if you have a standalone facility like West Santa Ana Branch or East San Fernando Valley, I think it's a perfect DBFOM, design, build, finance, operate, maintain. Perfect. You have to have a concessionaire agreement on the O&M, whatever period we decide. Normally, in Denver, we had the O&M period as the life of the vehicle. 30 years, that's typically kind of what you want. And but we were able to do that with a payback at the end toward the end. What makes Measure M perfect is that there is no sunset. You follow me? So we were bold enough to recommend to our board no sunset. Now, if that thing had failed, I probably wouldn't be standing up here right now. But I give a lot of credit to the LA Metro Board who said, we'll take a chance on this. I mean, this is unheard of. Most of your measures are 30-year measures. The measure we did in Colorado was a 30-year measure. That Fast Tracks measure is a 30-year measure. So what happens with that is, it's 30 years, you know, you're not able to bond against anything beyond that, you know what I mean? And then if you get hit with a recession, which you will, 30-year period, you're gonna get hit, you know, there's gonna be a slowdown. And then all of a sudden your sales tax revenues don't come in as you planned, and you got a hole. You got a hole in your program. And that's what happened in Colorado. What we have here is no sunset, which we can say that we can do something like a P3, and we can ask the private sector to bring in money up front with a payback on the back end with a reasonable rate of return. Because I tried going to the private sector and saying, hey, listen, it's your civic duty to build this for nothing. And they said, no, Bill. We have to have a reasonable rate of return, but you can do that and structure a deal even further out with maybe a higher rate of return if you have no sunset. Yes, sir.
Yes, I asked this question at the last Transit Coalition meeting of your lady here, so I apologize if this is a repeat for some people in the audience, but it's about the West Santa Ana branch and the Gold Line extension to Whittier and the Green Line extension, because I live in Orange County, Fullerton, and I rode the train here. And those are the projects most relevant to us in Orange County, because I like to see the day sometime in my lifetime where the historic Pacific Electric corridor is the West Santa Ana branch, and then Whittier over into La Habra, Rhea, and then, you know, connecting into hopefully rapid transit that gets developed in Orange County itself. But my question to you is, what can us in Orange County do to help LA Metro move those projects along in the planning process with a longer vision like that?
Well, you can talk to Daryl Johnson for one.
Oh,
I think these things are tough, and you got to have the political will, I think, to do these long-range projects and a vision that everybody can sign on to. I happen to think that we should be more like Europe in our transportation system. There should be no borders. There should be one fare media from LA Metro to OCTA. You know what I mean? And so we have actually gone down. Mayor Garcetti, about a year ago, and I went down and met with the Orange County supervisors and the board to talk about how we can connect the West Santa Ana branch to the streetcar that's being built right over the border. And so I have still, you know, I have not lost hope that we can do that. But no, I'm with you. I think, but I think it, you know, the political will has to be there, because like myself and Daryl Johnson, we can talk about that, but if their boards are not ready, then it's just a tough thing. Yes, sir, on the back.
Hi. So I have a question about emerging transportation technology.
Yes.
So it actually makes me sad. It doesn't bring me any joy to say that like this is the 5th year that Metro is going to see a decline in ridership.
Yeah.
I think, you know, a couple of like network transportation companies that have gone public have reached the tens of billions of dollars in terms of valuations, as well as like revenue, of which Los Angeles by its size must represent like a significant portion of that. It sort of tells me that, you know, for many years Metro was asleep at the wheel in terms of like the potential for revenue, in terms of, you know, transportation, servicing transportation needs in the county. So my question is, how confident are you that what Metro is doing now
Mhm.
and the decisions that are being made now will mean that, you know, Metro will continue to play a vital role in terms of like mobility in the county?
Yeah.
And just like what, basically that's it.
Well, let me give you my take on this. The one thing I didn't mention is, along with the congestion pricing thing, we're looking to regulate T&Cs. And I'll start with that. And we're doing a feasibility study on that as well. The Ubers and the Lyfts of the world, they're out there, they're doing their thing, it's convenient, but they are contributing to congestion in a big way. And so we're looking at the feasibility of regulating them and charging them fees like it's happening in New York. They are using public right-of-way, and they are enriching themselves by using public right-of-way and not paying anything. So I think we need to go after them, not in a hostile takeover way, but we need to have them incur fees for using public right-of-way. And that's just a fundamental thought that I have, and we presented this to our board, and we're doing a feasibility study on that as well as the congestion pricing thing. So you're gonna see us move on that. So that's one thing. The other thing on ridership, yeah, we've had a decline in ridership, and yeah, you know, in some ways, you know, I'm starting to feel like, you know, the horse and buggy, you know what I mean, when the cars, you know, the horse and buggy's gone, you know. But I prefer to look at it this way, how much we are doing to benefit the whole region and not just focus solely on ridership. Because I think if we use that as the only measure of our effectiveness, then we're missing the boat. There's a whole lot of other benefit. I get on the train every day, I ride the train every day, and I look on that train and it's crowded, and all I think about is if everybody on this train was actually driving too, that would be horrible. So I think it's a benefit there. I think the other thing, though, I would say, is if we are serious about congestion, if we are serious about climate change, and if we're serious about these things, then transit should be free. Now that's a radical view, but that's just me. I think it should be free, and I think if we can figure out how to generate revenue through, in this case, congestion pricing, transit could be free for everyone. Now, we've got experience with free days on transit, which is one of the reasons we did it. We did Earth Day, free. The voter, last election day, it's free. Ridership increased between 5 and 10% on those days. 5 and 10%. People got on the system. So if we're serious about, especially climate change, and if we're serious about, because we're doing all we can do right now. There's some improvements that we should make on enhancing the customer experience. You know, we got to do that. We got to make Wi-Fi available. We got to do all of these things. We got to have cellular service in our tunnels, which we're doing. We're doing all these things to enhance the customer experience on this side of the ledger. So we're doing the enticing things, right, to convince people to ride. What we have to do now, that's the carrot approach. Now I think we got to do the stick approach, which is congestion pricing, to force a change of behavior. You have to have both of these things to impact change, because people won't get out of their freaking car. Listen, I was talking about the commercial with Matthew McConaughey. You know, he comes in, he makes this difficult shot. His hair, and he goes out, he gets in the Lincoln, and his hair is waving in the wind and all that. I want to do a commercial with me doing the shot on the pool table and go out and get on the bus. got to do both the carrot and the stick approach if we're serious about reducing our carbon footprint. People ain't gonna do it on their own. They'll do it if they incur a fee to drive all the time. That's what I'm thinking. Now, let me know. I'll let you know if I survive this. I mean, leadership is dangerous. Yes, sir.
Well, Phil, I gotta tell you, with a master command sergeant role, I think you're probably pretty good at the stick part.
Command Sergeant Major. I'll tell you military stories later.
One of the dear projects to your heart, and speaking of leadership and polls and money, Union Station, Link US,
Yes.
has been in the news recently about, possible funding changes.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on how that project, and it's not a Measure M project, it's not a Measure
Right.
R project.
Right.
You want to give us an update on how you're seeing this thing happening these days?
Well, here's my short answer on this, is I think we have to do Link US.
Well, with Metro and MetroLink,
That's right. I think we have to revamp this place, redo this place. I mean, we are going out with, you've seen the plan, the ed grade and all of that. And I was testifying for the state transportation committee. Was that last week, I think? And there was this move afoot. There has been this move afoot to move high-speed rail money from the Central Valley down here. And so I was going to testify, and I was, actually when I walked in the Capitol, I was really surprised. There was all these contractors and consultants crawling all over the building. And some of them were waiting for me to come in. I'm like, they was like, hey, wait, no, what are you talking about? Trying to convince me in my testimony to say that this money should be switched from the Central Valley to down here. I ain't going there. Not right now. Because the commitment from high-speed rail for down here was $500 million. It's called bookend money. There is an outstanding amount, $423 million, that I'm told will be taken to the High-Speed Rail Board in October for us to get that money. That is a big part of the funding plan for Union Station here, Link US. I absolutely think we need to do some run-through tracks, because this is a stub-in station, right? It's a stub-in station, so all trains got to come in and they got to back out, all that. We need this station to have run-through tracks that will increase the efficiency as we build out these other lines, whether it's West Santa Ana branch or something else. Now, we know that we have a gap there. We know that there's not a lot of money in Measure M, but we are putting together a finance plan for that that includes the high-speed rail money of $423 million, that includes possibly a TIFIA loan, that includes possibly a RIF loan, and we want to look at the possibility of creating an enhanced finance district here, around here, just like we did at Denver Union Station. If you've been there, that was our deal, and it's generating about $3 billion right now in real estate. And that real estate revenue is being used to pay off the loans for Union Station there, where we used 11 different financing sources. A friend of mine calls it a finance lasagna. 11 different financing sources to do that project. So I absolutely think it's critical. If we're going to build out all this other stuff, we got to do the hub. Or the hub is not, it's not going to work if we got all these projects and we still have a stub-in station. So a couple more questions and then we'll break it up. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. My question is, if I go to London, Seoul, or Tokyo, I don't need to drive because the survey network covers most of the city. Now we do not have that in Los Angeles. As a CEO of Metro, whether you are envisioning someday we will have such a system or better system, and how you would achieve that? That is my first question.
Okay.
My second question is, we are putting billions of dollars, $1, $2 billion, $3 billion to build 10-mile like way. Can we do it from the beginning as a more efficient system like a CBTC or moving block, so that with the same wave line, we can move 30% more people, 40% more people. Then building somehow not the best in the beginning, and using a lot of money and downtime to upgrade that later on.
Yeah.
So those are my two questions.
Well, the first one, I do envision a system that is very efficient and all over this county. Now, we've done the first really hard step, and that was Measure M. That was the first, so 71.1% of voters here said, yes, we want you to do it. Now, that's incredible, right? 71% said yes. Now, somebody asked me about the motivation of those voters. I don't care what the motivation was. I mean, some of the motivation was, hey, I want everybody off the road so I can be on the road by myself. Okay, cool. So I think part of the journey we have to go on, the first part was Measure M. We got that passed. And not only did we get that passed, but the voters agreed with us that it should have no sunset. That's incredible. So they are saying we want a system like that. So we're building all those projects. People say, well, it's taking too long. Well, the interstate highway system took 40 years. You know what I mean? And so we're building those projects. It's up to us now to make sure that the alignments are the right alignments and they're going to the right places. That is what, and to manage all of this. The expensive building of these projects is something else that I'm really concerned about as well. And you all are all in here, you contractors, you money brother. To build a subway, it's $1 billion a mile. This is ridiculous. This is unsustainable. It is unsustainable how expensive it is, let alone, it's even more expensive in New York. Now, part of it is the old infrastructure and the utilities and, but you can't tell me that in Europe that folks there in a city that's much older than any city here can build a subway for almost half the cost. I mean, that's, something's going on here. I think it's probably called the Transportation Infrastructure Complex. Or something. And you remember, military industrial complex, I don't know. There's something going on here where it's so expensive to build that it is going to actually ruin, as we try to get these projects in and we're thinking that it's going to cost something, we got this internal cost estimate, it comes in higher, and contractors are figuring out all kind of ways to slap claims on us, and you got the delay claim, you got the disruption claim, and you know what y'all do. I know what y'all do. It's gotten to the point where I have brought in a claims person here on my side of the table so I can figure out all the shenanigans that you guys are doing. Not y'all, not you.
We're trying to help you, protect you from it.
I know. But I think we have the will. I was talking to a radio station the other day, and I was saying that I think in the next 10 to 15 years, our mode share is going to rival New York. And what that mode share is, the transit mode share, that's the percentage of folks that's using transit versus other modes. Right now, we're at between 7 and 10%. I see us getting to 25% mode share. I really do. But that is going to take about three things. One, continue to build all the lines and everything. 2, we gotta have a stick, and that's called congestion pricing. And 3, we need the qualified workforce in the contractor capacity. I don't know if I answered both of them.
My second question was, for new lines, as the leader, could you think of putting the best system, most efficient system to
Yeah.
begin with?
Yeah.
Such as CBTC or moving.
Yeah, I think making sure that we listen to the private sector, I think is the key. Because we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what technology is going to, how it's going to evolve even 5 years from now. So it's important, I think, that we stay open to innovation and that we allow a vehicle, no pun on that, but a vehicle for the private sector to say, here are some alternative technical concepts that we should be open to that. And that's how we build a future system. Because we don't know, right now, but that's why we created the unsolicited proposal process. So you could come in and say, no, you don't want to do that, you want to do this. All right, a couple more questions. Right here and then right here.
This month's Wired magazine
Yes.
has a nice article on the Next Gen study.
Oh.
And they are excited about the data-driven approach using cell phone GPS data,
Yes.
which is central to the study. I'm wondering if Metro is planning to expand that kind of data-driven approach to the design of rail lines, bicycle paths, whatever project.
Yes, the answer is yes. We started that with NextGen, where we are doing this whole data, cell phone data and all of that. It's pretty incredible. It's kind of scary too, though. No, we want to expand that to all of our other projects and have data-driven kind of projects. But we're doing that on NextGen in a big way. And when we announce or present the results later on this year, people are going to see that. They're going to wonder where we got this information. But it's pretty incredible. And we got a really smart person that's heading that up, Conan Chung.
Bill, with the Olympics coming in 2028, are there going to be new funding sources or additional funding sources to help get the city ready for the Olympics?
Yeah, man, wow. You know what, the answer is yes. The last Olympics that were held here, there was a White House task force put together that came with money. In Atlanta, I think they got about $2 billion to help with projects. And so the answer is yes, but I hesitate with that because there has to be a discussion as to who pursues that money. You know what I mean? Because, I made a foray into that and the host committee said, Bill, what are you doing? So we got to figure that out, but there is money that's coming with that. And there should be, right? I mean, there should be. There should be money. I mean, we're hosting for the entire United States, not just LA. So there should be money, infrastructure money, I think, coming into this county. And so we are pursuing that along with the host committee, who we're working with very closely. Okay, I'm going to close it up, but you, last question, because you didn't get the, really? All right. Okay, thank you all for having me.
Thank you. I'll email some stuff here.
Okay.